everyone. It has been a minute since I've been on here, and for right now, I don't plan on really showing my face in the way I have for previous reviews, just because that's not really what I'm feeling for the time being, and I'd like to focus on the reviews themselves, so it's going to be pretty much audio exclusive. And because it has been a good minute since I've been on here, I wanted to do a video that had some connective tissue with a previous review that I did. Joker, Folie, Deux is the sequel to the 2019 movie directed by Todd Phillips. Once again, it stars Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck / Joker, and is directed by Todd Phillips. Phillips and Scott Silver both returned to write for the sequel. The movie takes place 2 years after Arthur Fleck murders talk show host Murray Franklin live on TV and confesses to several more murders. Now he is being held at Arkham Asylum. His trial is right around the corner when he meets Harleen Quinzel, played by Lady Gaga, a fellow inmate, and falls in love. In this time, Arthur continues down his road of mental deterioration and begins to fantasize in the form of show tunes and musicals, making the sequel a pseudo-musical to accentuate Arthur's state of mind. Now, there has been a lot of talk about this movie since it was released, and a lot of the narrative around it has been very, very negative. Some for the right reasons, some for the wrong reasons, and I'd like to break down what those are and aren't. First off, the movie isn't good. It is incredibly disappointing for what I expected it to be. The concept of a musical starring this version of the Joker sounded like an easy win to me. It's a follow-up to a movie that won 2 Oscars, including Best Actor for Joaquin Phoenix, and made $1 billion at the box office. I didn't think the first movie needed a sequel, but going for a more out-of-the-box approach did work for me. Joker is a character that can very easily fit into the genre of a musical that is goofy but somewhat mean-spirited, and adding Lady Gaga to the cast as one of the main supporting characters in a musical sounds like it should be a home run. But it wasn't. What went wrong here? I think the most straightforward way to explain how I felt after seeing this movie was frustrated. Not necessarily because I had high expectations or was really excited for the movie, but that it plays with some good ideas and squanders just about every single one. It's a muddled mixture of mediocre execution, making the movie feel like it didn't know what it wanted to do with itself, which ultimately felt like it had to be indicative of how Phillips approached the film. I did review the original movie when it came out back in 2019. It's insane that it's already been 5 years. But anyways, one of my biggest issues with the 2019 movie was that it felt very derivative. It felt like it was borrowing bits and pieces from other media, becoming an amalgamation of references, most obviously borrowing from Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, and The Dark Knight Returns. While this isn't a necessarily bad thing and can be seen as paying homage, Phillips also didn't really do anything different with those ideas or try to expand upon them in any effective way. However, the movie did end up overall working because what it borrowed from was also really good material. Now, it is entirely possible that any specific homages or inspirations went over my head, but at my meanest opinion, I do think one reason Folie Deux doesn't work is because they didn't know what to borrow from this time. And this movie is trying to be so much at once that it falls apart. And what is the movie trying to be? Well, number 1, a fantasy jukebox musical. Number 2, a courtroom drama about the consequences of extremism and the misappropriation of brilliance associated with a cult-like figure. Number 3, a continued character study of Arthur Fleck and how his history of abuse continues to deteriorate his mental state. Number 4, a fantasy romance with the introduction of Harley Quinn. Number 5, a believable follow-up to a hit movie that has to justify its own existence. Now, can these things be done? Yeah, probably. Is this also a lot to juggle? Also, yeah, probably. These different components that need to be addressed and melded together into the story do not end up working well together. To talk about the jukebox musical part of it, probably the most exciting part of this movie for me was the concept of it being a musical. I was a little disappointed to hear that it was a jukebox musical, but Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite movies of all time, so maybe it could work. Now, it's not a bad musical, but it does end up being fairly unremarkable. Joaquin Phoenix is a solid singer and can cover any blemishes in that department with his acting. Just look at Walk the Line. However, his approach here is to sing the way Arthur probably would, which makes sense to sing in character, but the vocals do leave a bit to be desired in the final product. Lady Gaga also falls into this trap during parts of the movie. All the musical sequences are fantasy. None of them take place in actual reality of the story. However, some of the singing is done in a realistic and grounded way. While this does work to some extent, my biggest issue is that Phillips does not juxtapose the fantasy and reality sequences well enough. While some of the sets do get more fantastical as the movie goes on and never really goes for it, the choreography is also lackluster. There's nothing really remarkable about any of the sequences other than the one where Arthur is fantasizing about getting violent in court. The musical sequences don't move the plot forward. They do give insight to how characters are feeling, but almost all of them are complete fantasy. While yes, that is the point, it also doesn't contribute to what is happening story-wise, and not in the way that a lot of musicals do. Now, it can be argued that the musical sequences are for character development, but when they happen, they stop the story almost dead in its tracks, because it has to still jump back to reality afterwards. This constant starting and stopping gets annoying as the movie goes on and progresses. I could feel myself getting annoyed in the second half of the movie when the music started because it felt like it was dragging out the runtime. The pacing of the movie is generally just kind of atrocious. Now, the courtroom drama, specifically 2 scenes, was, in my opinion, the best part of the movie. Mild spoilers. In the first scene, Sophie, Arthur's neighbor from the first movie, is called to the stand to give her testimony. She talks about her experiences with Arthur and her somewhat friendly relationship with his mother. She explains that Arthur's mother was generally disappointed in Arthur and how single-mindedly naive he was about life and what he was supposed to do with his life. This triggers something in Arthur, moving into a musical sequence with him now as Joker attacking people within the courtroom during the number. I felt like the sequence had the best connective tissue between the drama of the story and the musical sequence actually moving something forward. After this, Arthur has a breakdown and fires his lawyer, planning on representing himself in his Joker persona. The second scene I think worked really well was when Gary, Arthur's co-worker from the first movie and witness to one of his murders, is called to the stand. At this point, Arthur is in his Joker makeup and is putting on a show questioning Gary. And credit to Lee Gill as Gary. He gives a great performance here. One of the best performances in the movie. Gary tries to plead to Arthur to understand why he did it and has to hold back tears explaining that he thought Arthur was going to kill him next and that he hasn't been able to go outside in the last 2 years because he's too scared. And this does shake something in Arthur to some degree because it flies in the face of his identity as an underdog. This, to me, is where the movie worked best and is what I think they were actually wanting to do with the story. There is some effective social commentary with how Arthur's popularity and public perception is addressed. Arthur himself is a naive loner who was desperate for attention. He went into Murray's show planning to kill himself on live television because it was a last-ditch effort to get people to pay attention to him and people like him. In the moment, he gets so worked up that he turns the gun on Murray instead of himself, killing him after explaining that he was there as the people that society forgets. This wasn't planned, but he then is taken in by a subset of society as a hero that stands up to injustice and the people who look down on him. Some of the criticisms I've seen when it comes to this movie, frankly, don't make much sense to me. A lot of people seem to think that this would be the beginning of Joker creating his own criminal empire. While yes, that is also something I would prefer to see for a Joker movie, it isn't consistent with the character from the first movie. This movie does keep that character consistent. His characterization is the same. He haphazardly takes on the persona of Joker because people like what they think Joker is, not who Arthur actually is. Joker stands up for them, not Arthur. The movie dives into this a bit and does show that Joker's followers have taken on an agenda of their own in his name. Arthur is not capable, willing, or smart enough to run a criminal empire, but he can act like he knows what he's doing in front of an audience, even if it doesn't make any sense. I didn't expect Arthur to become a criminal kingpin, and part of me is happy that they did not go that way with his character and have this huge suave heel turn into that, because it wouldn't have been true to what was already established. As far as the Harley romance, I don't have much to say about it. I felt the same about this version of her as I did about Joker in the first movie. It's really only Harley in name, and a lot of other key characteristics felt like they were changed to serve the story. I didn't dislike it, but it didn't necessarily work for me. there is something left to be desired when it comes to Joaquin and Gaga's chemistry together too. There are a lot of comic book movies that have good scenes, but it seems to be most common in this genre to lack the ability to make those scenes work with each other in the context of the movie. You can have good moments and some things that work really well, but if you can't interweave that with the rest of the scenes and what is going on, then it doesn't really work. This movie made me feel the same as I did about similar comic book movies, specifically The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and X-Men Apocalypse. Some good scenes individually, but they don't make up for the overall product. The runtime is 2 hours and 18 minutes, and it feels longer than that. The story decisions become a little baffling by the last half hour especially. It felt like there was something there most of the time, and they kept taking the wrong turn with each decision. And the worst part is, it's just kind of a boring movie. Not a lot really happens throughout. The musical sequences aren't done well enough to justify the added fluff to the runtime. The story decisions felt incredibly repetitive to the point that the famous motif used for Joker's score is used in a scene that comes off as goofy. It felt like they were trying to use the motif to underline a moment between Joker and Harley's joining each other's motivations, the Folie shared psychosis thing. But the way it's used comes off as obnoxious, bordering into pretentious, which can be said about a lot of the movie. I did get annoyed by the time the credits rolled because this was a movie with good potential that squandered it. Trying to balance the fun of a musical with the kind of depressing, realistic nature of the story itself didn't work by the end of it because the movie becomes kind of depressing to watch, not only for the story, but just the execution of it. So when they are trying to have fun, it doesn't feel fun. There's also an aspect of the reaction to this movie that I really don't like about fan bases nowadays, and that's this entitled nature to react really, really strongly if something is not satisfactory, if they feel like it's bad. And this is not a good movie, but they act like it was supposed to be this completely different thing than what was already kind of promised with the first movie. And not everything was awful about this movie. I do want to highlight a couple of things I really liked. Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck is still phenomenal. He's great in this role and continues to be the best part of these movies. He's electrifying to watch throughout. Lady Gaga also does a good job with what she's given. When she's able to really sing and belt out in a handful of musical sequences, it is entertaining. She's obviously a very talented singer, and that fact is not lost here. In general, the performances are good. Brendan Gleeson and Catherine Keener are also really solid in their supporting roles. While I don't particularly like what they did or didn't do with the characters, those two are still giving good performances. The movie is also shot really, really well. It looks great. I really like the look of these movies. Lawrence Sher returns as the cinematographer and does a wonderful job at keeping the movie feeling like it has its own signature look. I also was a big fan of the costume design in this movie. The makeup and the costumes are still really well done, particularly a sequence towards the end that has Arthur or Joker in this white suit. I just think that's a cool look. Hildur Guðnadóttir also returns the composer for this score. I apologize if I mispronounced that. While unfortunately her score does take a back seat to the musical numbers, it is still really well done. I honestly can't think of a movie in recent memory that has had such a big disparity between the audience and critical reception between the first and the second movie. While I do think the first movie is a bit overrated, it did also win 2 Oscars and get nominated for Best Picture, while having an astounding audience reception and making over $1 billion at the box office. And this movie more or less became a quick flash in the pan that everybody seems to be forgetting already. I was ultimately disappointed with this movie and what it was trying to do. I think it had some good ideas, but I don't think it really executed any of them well. And with that alone, I honestly don't see how I could rate it any higher than a D+. I am interested to know what everybody else thinks about this movie, if they were disappointed, if they did like it. I know some people are going to like this movie and it's going to be a little divisive. I personally was not a fan. If you did like it, tell me what you liked about it. I really wish we got to keep the Batgirl movie. Stay tuned for the next video.